Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good, good.
Fine, thanks.
Good, good. Sorry to keep you waiting there. I was just having a wee chin wag with the guests. So most of you have been to. Oh, Linda Wallace is upside down here on the ceiling, Linda. You're right way up now. You're right way up now. So most of you have been to these talks before, but for anyone who hasn't, my name's Pauline, and I just host these conversations. And today we're having a conversation with Tom and Rhonda Muir, and they are up in Orkney, and Tom is an Orcadian, and you'll be able to tell from Rhonda's accent that she's not. Well, she is now, but she's not born an Orcadian. And
recording in progress.
Oh, who's come on? Oh yeah, that's it. It's fine. It's fine. It's all right, Margaret. I've got you. I think you've come on twice. So Tom and Rhonda Muir are they manage a website called Orkneyology.com, and they're in the process of setting up a press, publishing press imprint, which is called Orkneyology as well. And they're going to tell us a little bit about that, a little bit about their love of Orkney, and some interesting stories, including when Tom made Ross Kemp from EastEnders cry. So I'm going to pass you over now. Thank you very much. I'm going to spotlight Tom and Rhonda. Thank you very much, Tom and Rhonda. Hello. So I think we should start with Tom, with maybe you tell us a little bit about your Orcadian heritage. That was quite interesting.
Well, I don't know how sort of purebred Orcadian you'd say, because I have a great granny.
Here, Stella.
Hang on.
I have a great granny from Fair Isle, so I'm
Oh, thanks.
1/8 Shetland.
Yes. Hang on 1 second, Tom. Sorry, just while I sort out the noises
A bit of feedback, yeah.
Bit of feedback, yeah. If I ask you all to just mute just now, you can jump in and ask questions whenever you like, but if you could just all mute yourselves just now.
Get down, Stella. Did you? No, I'm watching it on my phone. Oops.
There we go. You can usually spot them, but usually the person moving about that's making the noise. Yeah, sorry.
Great, all the new skills we've all learned.
No, we're all learning daily. So thank you very much. Sorry about that, Tom. So you tell me a little bit about your heritage then.
Well, I was just saying I have one great granny from Fair Isle, which is in Shetland. It's halfway between Orkney and Shetland, who would have come down to Westry with the herring fishing. But I'm the youngest of 6, born at a farm called Valdegar in Tankernes, just next to the airport if you ever fly in. And my parents were middle-aged when I was born. So my dad was born in 1911 and my mum in 1922. So grandparents are, going back to the 1880s, and great-grandparents 1850s, 60s. But my mother's from the island of Westry. She was a draver, and my father was for Sandy, so 2 North Isles. And when they met up on the mainland, because he'd moved to the mainland, and they met here during the war, and she was, when she went home and told her dad that not only was she marrying a Sandy man, but a Sandy man who lived on the mainland, then oh, he wasn't sure about that. Can't you find a nice young Westry boy? So, but anyway, they stuck it out to 6 kids, and so
They made it work.
Aye.
Yes, yeah. And Rhonda, where are you from originally?
I'm from New York State in America, Western New York to be specific. It's up kind of near the Canadian border. rural area. So it's not, I mean, obviously it's very different from here, but as far as the small town rural vibe, it's the same everywhere, I think. But Tom and I met when I was doing some research. We just met by email back around the turn of the century, 2002, I think we decided it was. I was researching a fiction book I wanted to write, which was based on the Selkie folklore. And so I was sent to him, being the resident expert. And we had a few emails back and forth that were very friendly, and we, obviously liked each other, but he'd answered all my questions and I didn't want to bother him anymore. So that was the end of that. But quite a few years later, after my youngest child went to university, I decided I was going to take a trip for the first time ever before I got locked into a new job, and decided to come to Orkney. So I recontacted Tom, and that's how we got back into contact. And it wasn't very long after that we just started talking more and more. And
well, it got kind of ridiculous because we were speaking for like about 4 hours every night, on Skype, and it started to develop feelings that was stronger than just friendship. And it was like, come on, Muir, for Christ's sake, like, America, really,
This is ridiculous.
Yeah, so it's like, you never mark things easy for yourself.
No.
But I mean, that's human nature, really, isn't it? Why don't you fall in love with somebody down the street? Because I don't love them, I don't, but no, we were just like two bits of a jigsaw puzzle that clicked together.
Great, that's lovely. And what have you? So Rhonda, tell me a little bit about your background then in terms of writing. So you have a lot of writing, obviously.
Yes, well, I've been studying it ever since I was a young woman, but I had hoped, when I had 4 little children at home, I had hoped to make a living from it, writing from home, so I wouldn't have to go out and work. This is when I was after I'd left my ex-husband. But I couldn't make a living from it. I did sell a lot of magazine articles and things, and I was actually working on this fiction book just for fun, just to keep my sanity at a time when that was really needed. So it was a lot of fun, and actually I would love to do it again, because just the researching aspect of it alone was so fun. So I did finish the book, and I shopped it around a little bit, and I got a few nibbles, but nobody really wanted to publish it, so I put it away. And Tom has read the old version of it, but since then I have completely rewritten it, of course, because I looked at it and thought, I can do so much better now. So that's still kind of almost finished, that ancient book.
She's never let me read it.
It's not quite finished yet.
And what's that about then, Rhonda? What's that?
That's the Selkie. It's a Selkie.
Story. Yeah.
It's a fiction novel, a fantasy, but it's based around the Selkie folklore.
Great.
And it's set on the island of Hoy, in the valley of Rackwick, which is one of the most beautiful places in Orkney. And that's where I set it before I, just while I was researching Orkney and had discovered I wanted certain things that would fit in with the story, and that seemed perfect. And so when I finally came to visit Tom for the first time, he took me to the Rackwick Valley, and that's where he proposed.
Oh.
It's a bit like this, when you're sitting on a pink sand dune, beautiful scenery. How could you resist?
That's it. Exactly. Good job. It was very atmospheric.
There's red sandstone cliffs there, you see. So the beach is kind of a pinky color from the sandstone.
It's very beautiful.
So.
And Tom, what was your background? And because you're a book lover as well. I mean, I can see all the books behind you. They can't all be Rhonda's.
This is just a small section.
Yeah. No. Well, I was born in, like I said, on a farm, and was going to be working on it and be a farmer, and it just wasn't for me. It's a lifestyle, farming. It's not a job, it's not something you do as a 9 to 5. And so not knowing what to do, I ended up working on an archaeological dig.
Oh, great.
just outside Stromness.
Orkney, she said laughingly.
Yeah, it was at Howe Broch, just outside Stromness, where I live now in Stromness. And it was an amazing site. And because they had this Iron Age broch with a village around it, ditches and ramparts. But it had started as a roundhouse, an Iron Age roundhouse before that. And then before that, there was a Neolithic tomb on the site that was flattened to build the broch on, but there was still bits of it left underneath. And that's like one like Maze Howe, so a big complex kind of tomb. That in turn was built over 2 early Neolithic houses. And then when the broch was abandoned and fell down, there was Pictish buildings in the rubble. And then there was a Viking woman's burial on top of the whole thing when it was a mound. So, you know, it's an amazing site. I stayed in archaeology for, you know, like working on and off. I got a job at the museum for 3 months, which was in 1988, and I'm still there 33 years later.
Have you written any books about your knowledge, to impart your knowledge then?
Well, quite a lot. Quite a few. There's books on folk tales. There was absolutely no interest in folk tales when I was I was in my very early 30s. And there was kind of, you know, there was no interest in that. Nobody was working with folk tales, and I always loved them. I loved folk tales in general, but finding the Orkney ones and realizing that they weren't available, I decided to try to do something about it. And with my boss at the museum, Bryce Wilson, who was an artist as well, he produced beautiful illustrations to go with them. And so that came out as book Mermaid Bride in 1998. And in 2014, I published Book of Orkney Folk Tales with the History Press. It's part of a series of folktale books from all over the different counties in Britain and the Republic of Ireland as well. So there's that, but I've also written books on Icelandic sagas and wartime history and, you know, all sorts of things. So it's been quite a wide-ranging collection of stories.
And the stories then, were they not? Had they kind of disappeared because they were handed down as word of mouth stories? Is it that was?
There was no, the interest in it had kind of gone. It was the church was pretty down on them in the 19th century, and that was kind of what started. Sorry, we've actually just got a visitor, so Rhonda's
don't worry. As I said, we're all very casual, don't worry.
But the
Speak of the devil, it was Bryce.
He
heard his name when he came along.
So but yeah, it's just a case of making them available, and there was a real interest in there. So no, you know, the folktales are being used in schools and such like as well for, you know, just part of culture and history of the place, but also as well things like writing projects, write your own story or artwork, you know, and even at one school did one where the kids created their own story, a little group of like 2 or 3, and then they told the story rather than writing it down. They actually got up in front of the class and told it. So it was to develop their social skills at speaking in public, you know, and so it was all about an exercise in communications.
And is there any story that I don't mean the children's stories, but the stories that you uncovered? Are there any stories that you particularly like?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot that I uncovered that I had no idea about. And kind of fortunately, in a way, there's not been a hell of a lot has turned up since then, I did a lot of research, and there's just a couple of things that I've come across in the ensuing 20 odd years, so it's so that's not bad, but
Yeah. And were there many Selkie stories then? Is that if Rhonda was pointed towards you, were there lots of Selkie stories?
There's a few, yeah. There was quite. I mean, nothing compared to what there would have been,
No.
because generally stories were written down, and that happened in, usually in the second half of the 19th century or early 20th century. Stories were being recorded around different places. I mean, recorded as in written down.
Yeah.
And then if that didn't happen, then once people, stopped telling them, they were seen as old-fashioned and kind of had lost their importance. And then other things came in to entertain you in the evenings, like radio to start with, television, even newspapers and stuff, more books. So, it all kind of faded away. So unless there was somebody there actually writing it down, then they don't survive, I'm afraid.
No.
And the attitude at the time that you started reviving them was you got some criticism.
Among older people, yeah, they didn't see the point in it, It's like, why are you bothering with old dirt, Because I like old dirt. Simple as that.
Yes. Yeah. And presumably they've done well, those books, because I'd imagine that there's been a rise of interest from the rest of Scotland and probably overseas too,
Yeah, I mean, the Orkney stories are getting told now all over the world.
Yeah.
That book was translated into Japanese and Icelandic as well, which was quite nice.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Great.
They're alive and well, and I mean, if I was run over by a bus later on this afternoon, they would still carry on. They're not relying on me anymore. They have a life of their own.
Yes, yeah.
In many other people's stories, vocabulary, they're using them, and so that's good.
Did you feel like until you'd published those books, any of those books, did you feel like the custodian of the stories, and you feel quite responsible for them and getting them out?
Yeah, there was a feeling of kind of responsibility that they had to come out in some shape or form. And I was very lucky. The Arcadian local newspaper, who has got a publishing wing as well, they published them, and they're still in print. That one's after 23 years. It's still in the shops, which is really, really good. And it still sells. And the owner of that wing of it, James Miller, says it's an Orkney classic now, and I kind of like that.
Great. I mean, Orkney's a hotbed for artists and writers and art and fine artists, isn't it? So
yeah, it certainly is.
So, to have an Orkney classic is that's pretty good going, because there's a lot of content comes out of Orkney.
And having an Orkney classic is fine. If you say it, then yeah, fine. Whatever. When somebody else says it, that gives it a bit more kind of kudos. Really, it's
yeah. So tell me about your new project then. Your Orkneyology Press. Then tell me about that. Whose idea was it?
Well, kind of both of ours, I think. I started the website Orkneyology.com about 4 years ago, not knowing what I was doing at all, and I still kind of don't. But as often happens with these things, you learn what you have to learn to take the next step. But one of our plans was always that we would be publishing our own writings about different things. Tom has a million different things in folklore and history that he could be making, small individual books about, or larger books, and I have some things to write as well. So that was the plan, that we would self-publish and sell through the website. But I don't even really know how it happened. We started talking about it with people, and well, I guess it was Bryce again, our dear friend Bryce, who did the illustrations for Mermaid Bride. He has remained a friend of Tom's all these years, and now a friend of mine as well. And we were trying to get him to write a book of memoirs, because he's got several other books that he's published. He's, you know, well known around here, but he's never really written his own little stories that he tells us about. And we said these should be written down. And the thing that he didn't like about his previous books was that they would go out of print at a certain point, and he wanted them to be available all the time. And when I said, well, this method that we're going to be using, it's perennially available to anyone who wants to buy one. So he said, would you publish my book? And he said, oh, yes. And then as we just started talking with a few more of our friends, just thinking of it, well, maybe we should do Bryce's book first, because he's a name and it would give it a really good start. Then all of a sudden we have a whole slew of people who are just literally people that we know very well, who are friends, who are fantastic experts in one area or another. And so suddenly we have a publishing company, which we're now just sort of getting underway. There's a lot of background stuff to do with the business end of it, and learning how to do different types of publishing and making them available in all the different places you would expect to find books.
And will they be physical books, or are they digital? Going to be digital, or both?
Both, yeah. We're planning to bring them all out in hardcover and softcover and ebooks, and eventually some of them audiobooks as well. But that's a bit more expensive and complex. So one thing at a time.
Baby steps. And yeah, sorry, Tom.
The big difference is that in the past, the Orkneyology have always published books. And there's been some small presses as well. The largest one was the Orkney Press. There's Bella Vista Press as well, but they always published Orkney books, and usually Orkney history books. And what we are doing is most of the books that we have lined up are Orkney. But there are, like about the third book that we're planning to bring out is a collection of folk tales from County Antrim in Northern Ireland by a storytelling friend of mine, Colin Irwin, of ours, sorry, not mine. He's my friend, not yours. So he's doing that. So yeah, we're looking outside of Orkney. It's not just going to be Orkney stuff. And we also are looking at doing an imprint as well called Hamnavoe Press. Because the bay where we live here in Stromness is called Hamnavoe, Haven Bay in the Old Norse. And that would be for fiction, poetry and fiction. So we would be looking at that as well in a very selective way. So.
Yes, yeah. And you found these friends, they're not just friends that you've kind of picked up. You're in quite a lot of literary groups, aren't you?
Well, it does happen to be just friends. It's just that Orkney is a place where, as Tom told me before I moved here, you can't throw a stone without hitting a poet. I mean, it seems like everyone is just so talented in so many different directions that it's literally just people you happen to know who are also really talented in many other ways too. So yeah, it's a very creative place. And we did just start out with people that we personally knew either had a book and hadn't found a home for it yet, or should have a book. So we just started asking around, and we've got something like 24 titles already lined up.
Oh, it's more than that.
So we'll be very busy for the next couple of years.
We've got between 15 and 20 authors lined up, and some of them have got multiple books, which will have to be spread out over a period of time. But yeah, there's all sorts of things. The one thing which I'm quite excited about is Ian Scott, artist in North Ronaldsay, has been writing an article for the Orkneyology newspaper called A Letter from North Ronaldsay every now and again. Yeah. And he's one of those collected and published. Oh yeah, since the 1990s, yeah. So we're looking at gathering those together and publishing all of them in a few volumes.
Lovely.
and it's just such a wonderful piece of social history, because
absolutely.
he's got all these historical stories about shipwrecks and people immigrating and tragic deaths and farming life and fishing, because he went to the Creoles and all as well. You got all that in it, but then there's also just the day-to-day things of what's going on, and the different, the harvest homes and the burnt suppers and all that sort of stuff. So it's it really gives you a snapshot into an island's life in that sort of 25 years or so period.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. And in terms, I mean, obviously Bryce is an illustrator, but are there other illustrators that you're working with, or you're trying to work with?
Again, an embarrassment of talent that we have to choose from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a friend, Catherine Suter. She's actually Catherine Suter Caddick, as her full name. She was married to Bill Caddick, who was a folk musician. And when lockdown started, it's just over a year, over 18 months ago, then she started to produce a piece of artwork every day for a mythical creature, starting with every letter in the alphabet.
Oh, a great idea.
And I said, these are wonderful, because she was posting them on Facebook. I said, these are wonderful here. Are you going to publish these as a book? Because I said, that would be brilliant with a story with it, And she said, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And thought it might be nice to do it as a book, but I hadn't thought of stories. And I said, well, if you're doing S, then I'm Selkie for me, please. I'll do that one. And then she does the cover illustrations for all the History Press's folklore series.
Oh, lovely.
So in fact, just up here on this shelf.
One you made
This is the Orkney folk tales, and that's the.
Oh, that's lovely. Yes.
That's the Selkie photograph there, about a Selkie man.
Yeah.
And so she had, all these wonderful illustrations, and I made that suggestion. Seems she's worked with storytellers all over the country with these books. People were saying, oh, can I do this? Can I do that one? Can I do this one? So she's got people to do, all the different stories. And I said, yeah, you should publish that. Try the History Press. So she went to the History Press, and they weren't interested. So in the meantime, Orkneyology Press came into existence as a concept, at least anyway. And so I said, I asked her if she'd be interested in publishing with us. So she's doing that. And she's also illustrating Colin Irwin's book of folk tales from Antrim. And she's going to do another book as well of Bill Caddick's songbook, because he wrote a lot of, songs that are being performed still to this day, but he never had a songbook out, and they were always intending to do one with her illustrating it. But then sadly he was diagnosed with prostate cancer and died in like 3 months after being diagnosed. So this is part of the healing process for her.
Yeah.
Part of the whole grieving process is to bring his work out with her illustrations to make it really personal. And
lovely.
So yeah, that would be a very special little book.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I might get you, Tom, to, as soon as you've got that book down off the shelf, it would be rude not to get you to read a little bit of it. If you could maybe think about reading a couple of paragraphs of one of your books there.
Well, I could do. I would have to go and hunt for my glasses, which I don't have with me. But the thing is, I'm a storyteller, so I don't need to read it. I can.
He can do it like off the top of his head.
I'll throw the floor open to you then, and you can.
I can tell you a story.
Yes, it'd be great if you could.
the story that's on the cover of that is a Selkie story, but rather than being the traditional, you know, the man finding the Selkie woman and stealing her skin and her having to reclaim it in order to go back to the sea. There was a story from Stronsay about Ursula Balfour. Mm-hmm. And Ursula was the daughter of a laird who owned the island. Mm-hmm. And he was always trying to marry her off to the son of another laird, you know, in another island, so that they would end up, the grandchildren would end up inheriting all this big estate, you know, more than one island. He always thought this was a good idea. She had other ideas, mind you, and all the potential suitors were always sent packing with a flea in their ear. And he was kind of despairing of this. Would he ever get his daughter married off? Now, the thing is, she had an ulterior motive because she was in love with a man who was completely unsuitable as far as her father was concerned, because he was the barn man that worked in the laird's barn. He thrashed the corn, he dried the grain on the kiln. He was a common crofton boy, a peasant like my ancestors were. And so there was no way that he was going to give her his blessing, the father, for marrying this guy. And she disguised the fact that she loved him by being really mean to him the whole time, being pretty horrible to him, and always finding criticisms with everything that he did. And every time she made an excuse to go down to the barn to see him, her heart would soar when she saw him, and his heart would sink, because here came that woman again that's going to give me a hard time. Now, one day, Ursula's luck changed because her dad died. And she was now the laird. She owned all of the land. Mm-hmm. And once she was secure that that was in legal documents, that she now owned that, she was the laird, she went down to the barn and she told the barn man to go home and get washed and shaved and put on his best Sunday clothes and come up to the big house. Why? He said. Well, because you're getting married, she said. Mm-hmm. Married? To who? And she says, well, to me, of course. Don't you know I love you? He said, no, I can't say I ever noticed that. Well, I do. So go on, get going. Well, she was the laird. She called the shots. If she wanted, she would chuck him out, evict him. If she wanted to be spiteful, she could evict his parents as well, siblings or any family members or whatever. So he did what he was told. He went, he got himself smartened up, and the wedding was announced. And all the lairds around the North Isles all rolled their eyes and said, oh, it'll never last. I'll give it 6 months. 6 months, get 6 weeks. Well, she was married anyway. And it soon became clear to Ursula Balfour that she'd made a mistake. She might felt love for him, but he didn't feel any for her. And the marriage bed was a cold and lonely place. Now, Ursula was not one to take things like that lying down, if you pardon the pun. She went off. She decided she was going to take herself a lover. Mm-hmm. But who? Because it had to be somebody among her own class, really. But if she did that, it would be one of the guys that she'd turned down. And she knew that they would blab, they would brag about it. You know, guess what? So she decided that she would take things into her own hands. She liked being in control. Mm-hmm. She went down to the shore and she knelt on the rock that overhung the sea, and she let 7 salt tears drop into the sea. Mm-hmm. They said it was the only tear she ever shed in her life. And as the ripples of the 7th one disappeared across the surface of the sea, a selkie's head rose up out of the water, a seal. And it swam towards her and it lifted the skin off its face, as you can see in the picture there. Yes. And underneath it was a handsome man who said, what do you want with me, fair lady? Well, I made a bad marriage, she said. And the marriage bed is a cold and lonely place, and I want to feel love. I want to be love and to make love. I want to feel arms around me. I want to be held. So you've come to the Selkie folk. I have. Well, I can grant you what you wish, but I can only come ashore every 7th stream on the spring tides. But then I will lie with you. So it was agreed. He went back to the sea. She went home, and on the night of the 7th stream, she met up with him, and she knew what it was to be loved for the first time in her life. Now, after a wee while, the servants started nudging each other and saying, Ursula's putting on weight, isn't she? You know, she was obviously getting a bit bigger around the belly. Well, it was soon obvious that there was more than one heart beating in Ursula Balfour's body. And when the bairn was born, he was a lovely wee boy, big brown eyes, and between every finger and every toe, there was a web of skin. And didn't that tell a tale? Now, the old nurse that Ursula had, she used to clip the skins, there's webs between the fingers and toes with a pair of silver scissors, but they always grew back in place again. But she kept snipping, they kept growing, and when they weren't allowed to grow in the natural place where they should be, they moved on to the hands, into the palms of the hands and soles of the feet. And it was a condition that was known in the islands as hard hands. And they said that if you scratched it, it gave a slight fishy odor. And that was supposed to be the descendants of Ursula Balfour and her Selkie lover. And I remember telling that one in Stronsey once, and then watching the audience, and they all kind of went nudge, nudge. And I thought, because I'd heard that there were still people with that. It's just a skin condition. And it seemed to be prevalent around that island, and still seems to be, apparently.
Amazing.
So now we know why.
Yeah, no, that's fabulous. Fabulous. And Rhonda, have you got any stories that you know that that are particularly appealing? You don't have to tell the story, but are there any, if you don't want to, are there any tales that you've kind of heard and think that's a wonderful story?
I just always love the Selkie tales. There are quite a few of them that Tom tells, and that's it. It's the Selkie tales, and you've noticed, I think, that it's women especially tend to really be attracted to the Selkie stories. And they come in all different varieties too. It's not always that, well, as we saw with this one, a lot of times it does seem that it's the fair maiden who's been, her skin has been stolen and she can't go back to the sea, and so she's almost a victim, but then in the end she finds her skin and off she goes again. But there are some variations on them too, and some of them the women are quite, well, they're all really, they're quite strong. They do get taken advantage of really at a certain point, but then they're able to take their life back in their own hands. But I don't really know what it is about the Selkie tales, but I myself have loved them ever since I was a child in grade school, and read a collection of folk tales and thought, it's just called to me. I think a lot of women have the same reaction.
I notice it in schools when you're telling it to primary school kids, and it's always the wee girls that love the Selkie stories. I remember telling it in a reconstructed Viking longhouse in just outside Stavanger in Norway, and there was a woman in the audience who I didn't know at all. She was very striking because she had long blonde hair right down her back, amazingly long hair. And turned out she was a writer, a journalist called Solveig Ureshold. And she, when I said I was going to tell a Selkie story, she said, "Oh, good." So she ended up coming and staying with me for a couple of weeks or so when she was researching a book in Orkney based on sagas. So I was the kind of, the person that she came to speak about sagas and such like. And I had a friend from Slovenia staying with me at the same time, and I said, you know, got a spare room. There you go. So so yeah, the Selkie stories certainly resonate with women of all ages. I think it's just
I imagine you probably can see a lot of seals quite easily from most places on Orkney.
a lot of places, yeah. I mean, just down at the end of the road here, go through Stromness, down at the point of Nest, that's a big pulling up place for common seals, but it's the grey seals that are the Selkies that are there.
Oh, are they? I didn't realize there was this distinction. Yeah.
Common seals were just seals. But there's a lot of them around Orkney. I think it's got about a third of the world population of grey seals is in Orkney.
Yeah,
I think it is.
very important in terms of being close to things in the landscape, and another living creature. They become very important, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, that's there's still a great affinity, I think, between people and seals. I mean, a lot of fishermen don't like them, but it's generally they're quite liked.
They seem to have some human characteristics, and you can see where the stories came from. With their eyes are very expressive and human looking, and their sound. You heard them crying one night and thought it was a human woman crying. He thought someone was in trouble. But
but then it groaned at the end of it. It was unearthly. It was like, that's not human. And I realized it was just a seal sobbing down at the shore below where I was born. But they do have a sense of humor as well. They play a lot. You see this young ones who are obviously like the boy racer equivalent of Selkies coming in on a wave to a cliff and seeing how near they can get to the cliff before they turn around and swim away. They're playing chicken with the cliff.
We've heard them bubbling underwater too. I actually heard it myself. Tom told me they would do that, and I did hear it one time where they just kind of like in the water.
Whether there's
repeatedly,
whether there's some reason for that, or whether it is just because it's funny, I don't know.
I lived in Arran for a while, and I used to walk along the front of the Lash, and the seals would follow you the whole way. They would follow the whole way along the coast up to the house. You know.
They love music as well. Any music, if you whistle to them, they'll come in. And but music, they're totally entranced with music. They'll follow you along. So just
I should maybe mention that during lockdown, Tom did it's something like 180 different stories, folk tales that we just recorded. He recorded them a few a day, and we put them up on the website just to give people something to encourage them, during that time. They're very, they're unedited. They're just recorded and stuck up. But we decided to leave them there as a kind of archive for people to enjoy, because people were still accessing them. So just if anybody's interested in hearing more stories, they're on the website. They're called Tales for Troubled Times.
Orkneyology.com.
Orkneyology.com, Tales for Troubled Times is just, it's several pages of them. You just go and click. There's ones for kids. There's the classic fairy tales for children. There's other story. Most of them are, well, a lot of them are Orcadian, of course, but there's a lot from Scotland and Shetland, but Scandinavia, Faroes, Iceland, and sort of Northern Europe. So that's generally what they are. So they're all,
no, that's great. That's great. And I'm going to throw open for questions from everyone. Anybody who wants to ask a question, if you can put your hand up on the reactions, or else hold your hand up and I'll come to you. But before I do that, you guys just get ready to ask the questions. But before I do that, you mentioned something about the if people had manuscripts, maybe from family, old manuscripts from family members that you were interested in that, weren't you?
Well, I have just written, so I still work at the museum. and I do their exhibitions. And I've just written an exhibition about the poet and writer George Mackay Brown, who was from Stromness. It's a centenary year. And as part of that, I was collecting artifacts that belonged to George from family members. And his niece, Ingrid, told me that, you know, something that I already knew actually was that her father, Jackie Brown, who was George's big brother, had written his memoirs, written about life in Stromness when he was young, and stories about people. And I just thought this would be brilliant to publish. I mean, it would just be a small book, you know, with some photographs of him in it as well. As we're doing stories from all over, you know, we're doing books from different places. It occurred to me that if anyone has got manuscripts of, you know, a piece that's been written by maybe parents, grandparents, that talks about the way life was in their area, that would be a really special thing to publish as well, because it gives that information for, you know, nationally as how people lived, as well as of local interest. So if anybody has anything like that, then, I mean, I might not be able to do anything with it, I don't know, and it won't be for a while because we've got so much to get through. But if, you know, we would be interested in that.
Yeah, definitely an interesting project. And would it be because a lot of our members are incoming Scots, so they might have come from, well, we've got someone on today who's from Canada, and we've also got some people that have moved up from England and Wales. So, is it from everywhere that you're?
Yeah. We're, like I said, we're doing books in Ireland and in England. You know,
we're really interested
Canada.
In fact, this is one of our main ideas to begin with, before we got all of our friends involved, was a way of preserving social history where people who have these things might not know what to do with them, even though technically it's easy to self-publish these days if you want to, but most people just don't know how to do it and don't want to be bothered. And then how do you help other people find the book and all that? But we kind of thought of it as almost a mission to try to rescue as many of these old social history and just interesting pieces that people might have written, and just make them available. Nobody's going to get rich on them. No traditional publisher would take a chance on them, because in the traditional way of publishing, it costs so much to put out a first run of books, and then you have to try to sell them. It's just a very expensive way to do it. But the way we're doing it, it will actually be printed one at a time. So all we have to do is prepare the file and put it on the different platforms, and then as people order the book, one copy is printed and it's mailed out, and so it's much more affordable, and you can afford to do projects that are probably not likely to sell huge amounts, but who cares? You know, it's one of the things we want to do.
It's being done for the love of it, not for the money. You know, I mean, we were doing this as a get-rich-quick scheme. I think we'll be very, very disappointed and disillusioned this time next year. You know, that's not the motive. And
recording things of importance.
Because you hear all these wonderful stories or whatever, and then, you know, sadly, as time goes by, people leave us and the stories go with them. So it's just, and sometimes if you pass down something, it can end up just being thrown out as, you know, piece of paper with writing on it, you know. So
I think you know, stories are obviously important, but in the same way that you know, I know many of the ladies collect, and I do collect scrap pieces of paper that your mother or your granny had written a recipe on, and that's in a recipe book or in a box, so that, you know, you might refer to the recipe quite often, or you might just want to keep it because it's something that you remember the person for, you know. So these things are all important as memento mori for people as they go down the years, aren't they? And if people have collected things and then they get passed on, then it's even adds weight to them, doesn't it?
I mean, you've got an old recipe book that you took with you, you know, that's literally falling in pages, but then it's got handwritten recipes from your mum inside it as well, and, you know, and it's still being used.
Yeah, exactly.
So
No, that's great. Well, I'm gonna see if anybody's got any questions, folks. Anyone, put your hand up and wave at me if you want to ask a question. Nobody wants to ask a question? I thought you might have lots of questions. Oh, Kath, hello, Kath.
Well, you know me, I'll jump in with both feet. Sorry.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed your story, so I do hope that you get an audio book. If there was an audio copy of something, would you be? Because it is something that I would like to do, is just write about my grandparents, but I do have problems. But I would like to record something. Would that be a possibility?
I don't know that much about how they go about creating audiobooks yet. That is something that we want to look into. That is
what
also,
I meant was if I recorded something, would there be somebody willing to put it in a book form?
oh, put it in a book form.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, we can even look at getting volunteers to transcribe documents or recordings
yeah.
as well. So
there's an app called Otter, OTTER.ai, and that you can put a recording into Otter and it will come out as text.
That's true. Yeah, I forgot about that. There are several things available like that now that are voice activated. But what we've found is that if you have any kind of what the app considers an accent, it will do its best to find out what words you're saying, but it'll probably be wrong. So you actually have to go through and correct.
oh yeah, you
but,
have to.
but do the most of it anyway.
Yeah. You do have to go through, but this it's very good, and they're fine tuning it all the time, and it's getting better. But Kath, that might be something that you could do, because you could record yourself and then you just import the file, the MP4 file or the MP3, and then it does it for you, and you can get someone to check it.
It's like your own scribe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I'll be in touch, Pauline, because you lost me at MP4.
Yes, I'll give you my login details, Kath, or you can send it to me, and then I can put it in and tidy it up for you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. I really enjoyed listening to that. It was lovely. I could sit and listen to you all day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You've both got lovely accents, or you've all got lovely accents, but
I thought it was so funny when I first came here. I thought everyone else had an accent. I didn't realize I did too. Typical American.
She wouldn't speak to me for ages because she was worried that I would find her accent annoying, and it's like,
I thought I had this appalling American New York accent.
well, New York City is very, very different from the rural area where
That's
you
true.
live. So
oh yeah, no, I've been upstate New York, and it's lovely. I like it very much. It's a beautiful part of the world. So does anyone else have any questions or any comments? We have got some. I thought Rhonda sent me some pictures. Would you like to see some lovely pictures of Orkney, just to whet your Orkney appetite?
Oh, you can tell them the story. It's a very short one.
Oh yeah,
how you made a certain person.
yes, sorry, I forgot about that story.
Funny. It happened recently, and it's just a funny story.
I'm not actually supposed to tell this.
No, right, good.
Because it was
watching. It's fine.
Don't tell anyone.
It was embargoed, but I don't think that they ever told me when you could say anything. But Ross Kemp, who was Grant Mitchell on EastEnders, he's fronting a new TV show about diving historical shipwrecks. Yeah. And so he was in Orkney because, you know, we had the Chairman High Seas Fleet was interned here after the First World War and then scuttled on mid-summer's day 2019. So biggest loss of shipping in a single day. But he was diving on some of these wrecks, but we were talking about the wreck of the Royal Oak, which, I mean, he wasn't allowed to dive on, of course, because it's a war grave and very, very sensitive around that. Arcadians are extremely protective towards the Royal Oak and the memory of it. But anyway, it turns out that he had two uncles who served on HMS Hood, and they sailed from Orkney to hunt the Bismarck and were lost on the ship when it was blown to pieces by the Bismarck. You know, the shell had penetrated the weak deck armor that they always intended to thicken but never got around to, and exploded in the ship's magazine, and the whole thing blew up. And his two uncles were lost. And so we were talking about that, standing at the Churchill Barriers, which was built in response to the sinking of the Royal Oak to seal the islands to the east side of Scapa Flow. And using my storytelling skills, I was weaving this picture about his uncles, you know, and this Orkney being the last piece of home that they would have seen, although to them this couldn't have been more alien than the place where they came from. You know, they came from Portsmouth, that side of his family. And but these islands were the last piece of Britain, the last piece of the country that they were fighting for against the Nazis. And he welled up, you know, and started, tears streaming down his face, and I thought, yes. Yeah, he was like the hardest man on television, and I thought, I made the hardest man on television cry. That makes me the hardest man. So, but I'm not really supposed to say this.
No,
The program is still a secret and all that, you know.
But the cameramen were very happy, so we hope that they'll leave that
they
part
were
in.
straight in. They were straight in on that bloody tear in the eye, I'll tell you. Yeah.
Did you take him down and make him cry in the sea, just in case, you know, you got selkie up?
I think his partner would have had a few complaints about that.
Yeah.
But he was a nice guy, actually.
Yes.
He said he's got this ridiculous hard man image, but he says, I'm really soft. And but the trouble is, whenever he goes out to a pub, there's always some idiot who wants to start a fight with Grant Mitchell, you know, rather than Ross Kemp, actor. So, I first remember him on a Kellogg's Fruit and Fibre commercial.
Oh yeah, I know that one. Yeah. And I won't show you pictures this time, because we're probably gonna have another conversation, aren't we? Another Zoom conversation once you've got your first book out.
That would be lovely, yeah.
So let's save them for then. But what I maybe do is, if you could leave us with a place that you love in Orkney that you think that people would like to go to if they came to Orkney. If you could both think of a place that you would like to pass on, or you could think of your favorite place and then choose one that you don't want anybody to go to.
That's the problem with telling everybody all the places. They turn up there.
I think I can guess what yours would be.
Well, mine is the aforementioned Rackwick Valley. It's not that difficult to get a ferry to Hoy. There's a ferry that you can take your car on with. You can also go over as a foot passenger, but if you're very fit and you want to walk kind of cutting across the island, you can walk from the ferry as a foot passenger to Rackwick Valley and back, and that would be about a 10-mile round trip.
There's two ferries, so there's the car ferry, and there's a passenger ferry that leaves from Stromness and goes to the island of Gramsay and to the Mones Pier north end of Hoy, and then you walk between the hills to get to Rackwick.
Which is it's a very sloppy walk usually, but it's a great, it's just so alone and so beautiful. And then when you get to Rackwick Valley, it's just what the walk?
No, describe the valley.
The valley is, well, we said there was pink sand. It's actually kind of striated pink and white. It's almost like every time the waves come in, they leave a new pattern. They must be different weights or something, because the pink and the cream color tend to be in stripes or in swirls, or, so they're laid down, you can see them individually. It's gorgeous. And there's sandstone cliffs on both sides. And if you can take a walk up the hills and go out to the Old Man of Hoy, which is the highest rock stack in Britain, I think it is, or highest vertical. But anyway, it's incredibly beautiful. In the valley and the beach, there's the beautiful sand, but there's also all these enormous tumbled boulders that are all round and striped, and it's just such a magical place. There's something really special about it. It feels very secluded, even though it's actually quite well visited, especially in the summertime. People love to come out there and hike and camp. There's a little bothy that anybody can use. I don't think it's open inside right now because of COVID, but you can still camp out in the kale yard where it's surrounded by stone walls, and anywhere else you want to, really, of course. But
there are places to hire there as well. We always go to a cottage.
But it feels secluded and alone, even though there are always hikers and everybody walking past. It's just there's lots of space, and it's so beautiful. So Rackwick. We actually have a page about that on the website if anyone wants to look into it.
George Mackay Brandes, well, he wrote about it a lot because he loved the place. And Peter Maxwell Davis, the composer, went out there having read an essay that George had written about it, and he fell in love with the place and bought a ruined cottage and ended up restoring it and living there for many years up on the top of perched up on the cliff. But George described it as a valley of light. And, my place that I love it's two places actually, but it's connected. The Gloop in Dearness is a sea cave that the roof is collapsed in. So you're walking along farmland, and then suddenly there is this huge hole, long and narrow, with sheer cliffs on either side. And it's absolutely beautiful. And there's a wee burn that runs into it. So you've got this constant little waterfall going at one end.
And in June, the sea peaks are just carpeting the side of it. Just glorious.
And birds nest in the caves and around there. And it's beautiful. And then if you carry on walking a bit further east from there, you come to the Brochadernis, which is an island that is attached to the mainland. You go down a flight of steps. When I was a kid, you just scrambled down where the burn went, you scrambled down the face, but now it's all, steps, and there's a chain up the side. Then you have to walk up a narrow path that goes up the side of the Broch, because it's quite high. There's a lovely little amphitheater in there that's connected to the sea, and there's a cave opposite that the Selkies go in and they sing because they get an echo in there, and
people swim there too.
And they like to hear the sound of their voices echoing back.
You'll hear them and they're
and then you'll hear the old male Selkie and the old fellas, those with the newspaper over his face trying to sleep, grunting and groaning in disapproval at this young Selkie singing along to the latest Selkie hits. But on top of the island, there is a medieval chapel, dates to the 12th century. And around it, there is a whole pile of Viking buildings, which are just hollows in the ground now. They had turf and stone walls. And they date back to the early Viking period in the 800s, right through to the medieval times. And underneath that, there's Pictish. There was a Pictish settlement. So it's a place that's been taken over by the Vikings. And it's absolutely beautiful with the cliffs and the birds and wildflowers and Grassa Parnassus growing on the way there, which is one of my favorites. And it's a lovely, lovely walk. Beware of Arctic terns, though.
Beware of everything in nesting season.
Dive bomb.
I had one stuck in my head once. I went around with it flapping away for ages.
There's a really easy way to get around that, though, the dive bombing birds. An old woman here told me, and I've carried, whenever I go somewhere like that, I now carry my walking stick, because if they start to dive bomb you, and the Bunksies, the Arctic,
the great skuas,
really big, vicious looking birds, well, they'll dive bomb you too, but because if you accidentally wander into their territory, they don't like it.
No,
If you hold a stick or a shoe or whatever you have up above your head, then they'll dive bomb at the top of that instead of your actual head. So useful tip.
A friend of mine used to just walk around with his hand on top of his head like that, like a coxcomb. So that does a trick too.
And do Orcadians come to the mainland very often and rave about the mainland the way people from the mainland go to Orkney and rave about Orkney?
When she says mainland, she means Scotland.
Yeah.
Oh, Sooth, you mean? All right. Yeah, we travel.
Yes.
Yeah. we go all over the world.
But I just mean that everybody who goes to Orkney just comes back and is in love with it. Is there any part of mainland Scotland that you think?
The West Coast is just stunningly beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's absolutely gorgeous. One of the most beautiful little places I was ever at was Applecross.
Yes.
And that was a long, seemingly perilous car journey with sheer drops, you know, down the side.
And
I wasn't driving.
Oh no, yeah, you weren't driving.
That was beautiful. So absolutely gorgeous. Because it just looks across to the Isle of Skye, and it's just beautiful. I did a storytelling session there for the local school, and the kids are so chuffed because they never see anybody. You know. But my old pal Bob Pegg used to run a festival in the Highlands, Tales from Martinmas, and Bob and Mary are a wonderful couple, and we used to stay with them, and then he would drive us around, and we would do schools and stuff like that. And have a ceilidh at night. It's just wonderful.
Lovely. Well, it's been fabulous, guys. Let me see if anybody, because I've hogged the questions. So let me see if anybody's got any questions now, just before we. And if we don't, then shall we all unmute and then give our appreciation to Tom and Rhonda?
Yep. Thank you. Brilliant. Absolutely. Yeah.
So just for having us. Orkneyology.com is where you'll find all of the recordings, which is the sound of the evening. You'll find some facts about Orkney itself and some images and stories, and also that's where you'll find out when the books are coming out. But as I said, we're going to have another conversation about the first book, so we'll keep you posted on when that is, and that'll probably be at the end of this year. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very
so much.
Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you.
Real
Thank you.
pleasure. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.